You read 1290 books in 10 years. How on earth can you do that? You were a security guard previously and then now you're running an online business.
No matter what job that they do, there's something there, some skill they can develop within that job that they have that's going to serve them later on. So, I knew that books were able to lead me to something else.
What started happening after you started reading books?
The old landscape of working for someone else for 40 years and getting a pension and retiring for 5.
What were some of the initial books that changed your life?
In terms of specific books that have changed my mindset,
Before reading that book, I was in that mindset that massive success requires massive action. After I read that book, I thought the massive success requires... Do you read multiple books at the same time? Or how do you retain?
So for anyone who's to remember more of what they read,
You have more than 100,000 followers. That's not an easy feat. So what was the motivation behind starting that page?
Well, from the very beginning.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Compounding Project podcast, where we talk about taking small steps to become healthy, wealthy, and wise. I'm your host Satish Kachula, and my guest today is Matt Karamazov, who is joining us from Canada. He has 120,000 plus followers on Instagram, where he shares about book recommendations, reading tips, and many more. He read 1,300 books in 10 years, and I really want to find out how he did that. With that, Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for even for thinking of me and inviting me on. This is great.
Sure, yeah, I'm excited. I want to talk about a lot of stuff, but before that, can you talk about your background for people who might not know who you are?
Sure. Yeah. Well, very briefly, I'm about 34 years old, and so ever since I started counting the number of books that I'd read, which is just a vanity metric, by the way, it doesn't really mean anything. I find it motivating to keep track, and it is really useful to be able to go back in previous years to see what you've read. But I did start keeping track in about 2014, and we can talk more about this later. But I was basically a minimum wage security guard, and I started reading, and then. I had these 12-hour shifts that I had to fill with something, and I was watching the people around me, and they were, nothing against them, but they were kind of just playing games on their phone, or just kind of just sitting around, kind of like doing nothing, and with no plan to do anything else, and that just wasn't me, and I knew that there was something in books that was going to lead me to something else, and it absolutely did. So that's kind of where I started off. I live in Canada. I went to it's funny. I went to university for philosophy and Russian. And that was, I think it was about 6 years, because I was starting a business at the same time, and then I later shut down to do something else. But it was around the time where I had all the best sort of life experiences. Like I was boxing in Russia. I was living in St. Petersburg and going to university there in Russia, and my business was a music company, and so I was putting on concerts all over the world, including one in India, and I was living in Darjeeling, which is just like a beautiful place in northeastern India, and so I was there having all these cool experiences, and coming back home, reading all these books, and 100 plus every single year for the last 10 years, and eventually I was able to move away from that job and talk about books, recommend books full time, basically because of the internet, and just the opportunities that are available, just to build online, to build your own life, and so that's kind of that's a very brief backstory on me, but that's sort of where I came from.
I love listening to stories, and then your story is very inspiring. But you were a security guard previously, and then now you're running an online business. So that's the power of internet right now. So there are no gatekeepers to stop you from doing anything. I love diving into stories because that's how we connect to other people. I just love diving into your story. So I want to zoom in on your, basically, you said almost a decade you were doing as a security guard. So what was your mindset at that time, and before reading a book, and then what changed, basically? What started happening after you started reading books when you were, in those 12-hour shifts? What started happening?
Sure. Well, I had as you know, tremendous amount of time every single night. These were 12-hour shifts, and the job that I was doing, there were actually two different security jobs, and they both served me in two different ways. Well, many different ways, but two that I'll touch on. The one was an overnight security at a hospital around here, just a local hospital, and that one was the job where I did next to nothing. work-wise throughout the entire night. There were no, I mean, very few responsibilities. There's a lot of downtime, I guess I could say. And so out of a 12-hour shift, maybe a slow night would be, I'd get maybe 10 hours of, like 10 hours of reading done at work. I was getting paid for it. I was, getting my bills paid and, getting time to read. And then a busy night, I'd get and this is a busy night, I'd get about 6 hours to read.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
and and I don't want to give the impression that I was, that I took every single spare moment to read, and I didn't have, or I didn't do anything else. I did. I enjoyed working there tremendously sometimes, but I knew that I could not stay there. There's literally no way you can go, or no place you can go from there. It's the definition of a dead end job, right? And so I had to set up something else. But at the same time, I really I enjoyed my time there, and I used it effectively. So I knew that books were able to lead me to something else, and it was around that time I kind of started to write online, and this was before I ever made a single dollar online. And now I'm full-time writer. Like, I don't do anything else. I don't have another a job that I go to or anything like that. I'm full-time running my own business and just answering to myself and the people that follow me, right? Like, you don't, I may be my own boss, but I wouldn't have a business if I wasn't valuable to other people, if people didn't receive something beneficial from what I do, right? So it was around that time I just kind of started writing online, and just it's how do I put this? It was some sort of a blessing, or a really a good thing that nobody was really reading what I was writing at that time, because that's the time when you can put in the reps and nobody really sees it, because the first 100 articles that you write are going to be garbage. The first 100 videos are going to be terrible, right? And it's a good thing that people weren't seeing them, because then you sort of practice in private and you get better. And then once people start paying attention, you've already put in those reps. So a few years in was when I started to get better and started to gain a little bit more recognition, and some opportunities to get paid for my writing surfaced. And I started a little bit of private coaching, much less than I do now, but a little bit of that. And then sort of the opportunities just kind of snowballed from there. And there's a certain point where there was just no turning back. So it was just, I was all in. This is what I wanted to do. And, the internet is just we're living through the internet gold rush right now. I mean, the opportunity, there's the old landscape of working for someone else for 40 years and getting a pension and retiring for 5 years to enjoy it is dying. Like, if it's not already dead, right? So I was, among the few people at the time to sort of realize that. And now, everybody is. Or not everybody, but a lot more people. So that's kind of what I started doing. And then this part I'll keep more brief, but the other security job was at a bar, again in my local city, more bar nightclub type thing, and that was another just a phenomenal. It was. It was the highlight of my week almost. I didn't get much reading done there, obviously, but I did get a little bit of reading done, because I would work slow nights and I'd have books on my phone, and so I'd be reading on my phone until people show up, and then I'd get busy, and then but how that served me as well was I met thousands of people. I learned how to listen to people, how to speak, how to stand up for myself, how to just how to do all of these things, right? And get along with people, and conflict resolution, just so many skills that you learn in no matter what job. And so I basically use all of those things, and both of those jobs helped me tremendously in what I do now. So I was able to leave both of those behind, and now I do this full time. But I took plenty of skills and experiences and things like that from everything that I've done so far. Like, everything had to happen the way that it did for me to be where I am right now. And I think that's true for every single person. So, no matter what job that they do, there's something there, some skill or craft that they can develop within that job that they have that's going to serve them later on. You don't have to be stuck anywhere. You can develop yourself wherever you are, whatever you're doing, right? It can always be a means to something else if you so choose. So that was a sort of a long-winded answer, but there you go.
No. Yeah, there's so much to unpack right there. But I believe Naval Ravikant, I believe he said, there's so much information right now, but it's just that the what is scarce is the curiosity to learn. That's lacking right now because there's so
Yes.
much information over the internet. You know, if you really want to know about something, yeah, you're just like one click away from learning any new stuff. It's just that you'll have to have the curiosity to learn, and that's what's lacking, is what Naval Ravikant said. So I really want to know more about your story. So were you always a reader, or is just that when you started your job, you had so much time and that's when you started reading? Because I really want to understand the background behind your reading journey. Can you talk more about it?
Sure, of course. I always credit my parents for me, well, one, being able to read at all, and to enjoy it as much as I did. They were great models for me, and they not only, I mean, they spent a lot of time reading to me, making sure that I was able to learn how to read, and I was sort of falling a little bit behind in school with respect to reading. So I was behind everyone else, and they made sure that I kept up, and I got back up to the level that everyone else was at in terms of reading. And so basically I owe them everything. Like I would not be here. Like I would not have read 100 books, much less 1,300, if it hadn't been for them. So that is just crucial. And I have so much admiration for parents that read to their children, that buy books, that have books in their home, and just it just act as that model. And there's an interesting there's a funny sort of cartoon that I saw. There's this woman and child sitting next to another woman and child on a park bench, and one mother and one group is holding. They're both holding books, and the other woman and child, they're both holding phones. And the woman with the phone says to the woman holding the book, she says, "How do you get your kids to read?"
Yes,
And
yes, you can see.
that's how
Yeah.
you model that behavior, right? I've always loved
Yeah.
that cartoon, right? So it's all them, and then it sort of developed over time. Then I started with the Harry Potter books, obviously, and things like that. Lord of the Rings, I was reading that in elementary school, and just sort of went on from there. And then I fell out of it a little bit when I went to school, university. I would do the required reading. Most of the time, I do the required reading, and but I didn't really read outside of school. It kind of, I don't know. It's university was better, but in high school, I didn't enjoy reading because they kind of took all the fun out of it. But then when I had all this time on my hand, I rediscovered what I loved about reading, and then I just kind of dove right in, and then 1,300 books later, here we are.
Right. Yeah, that's a cool story. I want to double click on the story that you talked about, parents holding their phones versus books, because I'm actually witnessing it right now. I have a 15-month-old baby in a house. So I mean, when my wife and I, when we read, I mean, he starts picking up books. I mean, of course, he doesn't read, but it's just that he starts picking up books because there's so much learning that they do, but just by visually. Like you don't have to tell them anything; they'll just observe and learn. I mean, it's not specific to humans as well. Even animals, they don't speak, but they learn just by looking at their parents. And there's so much power in kids embodying their parents. So I mean, that's so powerful. I want to actually, one of my questions was, what were the initial books that you read that changed your mindset? So you mentioned fiction books like Harry Potter and a Lord of the Rings, but so when did that switch happen? From, I'm assuming you started reading nonfiction at some point, and then that must have transformed your life. So at what age did you make that shift from fiction to nonfiction? And also, my second question is, what were some of the initial books that changed your life, I would say?
Sure. Okay. Lots to get into.
Yeah, yeah.
Actually, I want to briefly revisit parents and reading. There are two excellent books, and they're both by Marianne Wolf. And if your listeners want to pick them up, I highly recommend them. One is called Proust and the Squid, and the other one is called Reader Come Home. And it's about how reading develops in the brain or doesn't, and it's about dyslexia, learning disadvantages and things like that. And one of the well, two things I'll mention. So one is parents who read to their children, who have there's books in the home, and they place a greater emphasis on reading. Those children hear and consume millions more words than kids who don't grow up in those environments, right? So they have a major advantage over kids who don't have books in the house. Like there's millions of words, and you can really fall behind or get ahead depending on how you look at it, if you have or don't have that. So it's parents reading or not reading to the children makes just a massive difference. And there's another statistic, I guess, the in Reader Come Home, which is fairly sad. Something like no, I live in Canada, so we don't have this, but I'm sure it's similar. So in the U.S., the Bureau of Prisons, they take children's fourth grade reading statistics, and they can predict how many prison beds they'll need in the future, based on how many, or on children, like on what their reading level is by the fourth grade. So they look at fourth grade reading statistics, and if they go down, they order more prison beds. And they've literally found a correlation, which is just wild. And she talks about that in Reader Come Home. But so moving on, a little bit happier. So yes, nonfiction. Let's see. I guess it started in university when I started to read more nonfiction. Up until that point, I think it was mostly stories and just things like that, novels. The very first book that I counted way back in 2014 was Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, and so there are plenty of novels in that time. But yeah, so I'd say later in university, later years, and then I sort of then nonfiction kind of took over, and then I now my split is maybe 85-15 nonfiction and fiction. So maybe not exactly, but I do have a mix of both, and they're both necessary. Really, I mean, you can't have one without the other. In terms of specific books that have changed my mindset, there have been so many.
Yeah.
Like obviously. One that I'm actually rereading right now is called Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz. And so for anyone who doesn't know, he was a plastic surgeon in the 1960s. And what he realized is that he could fix his patients' outer blemishes or what have you, things that they didn't like about themselves, but their internal self-image still reflected their former self. And so what he realized is that people can never outperform their self-image. So a lot of what that book goes into is self-image work and building yourself up internally if you want to ever see the kind of results on the outside. You can never outperform your self-image. And that idea has never left me. And there's another book that, this fits right in with what you'd be interested in. It's called The Slight Edge by Jeff Olson. And it's about compounding, consistency, right? The main takeaway is that, small, seemingly insignificant steps, added up over a long period of time can make a massive difference. And then you've got the Compound Effect by Darren Hardy and Atomic Habits. Like all of those books really shaped me as well. And, things like that. I read a lot of sort of wide-ranging things in different fields, even things that I don't understand all that well. Like space exploration, a lot of science books and things like that. I read those a lot slower because I have to sort of, I'll have to look up words that I don't know, and right, I'll have to go a little bit slower. But I love sort of that perspective, how our lives are infinitely valuable and important, but they're also very, very, very small in the grand scheme of things. And I think balancing those two ideas, how, you are the most important, person, in the entire universe. And at the same time, it's a big universe out there, so it's that sort of balancing of perspectives. And I think, one of the major things that reading has done for me is allow me to hold, these sort of seemingly contradictory ideas in my head at the same time without running to either one, and sort of being able to hold different perspectives in mind and see how they might both have elements of truth. And I think that's just a super valuable skill for anyone. So.
Well, I love your book recommendations. I mean, you might figure out the name of this podcast is Compounding Project, because I was so blown away when I first read the book Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. That was, I would say, that's a big mindset shift that I encountered for reading that book. I was in that mindset that massive success requires massive action. So that was my mindset. So after I read that book, I thought that's the success, like the massive success, requires small actions, but small consistent actions repeated over a long period of time. And I was like, why was I not taught about this in school? That was the first question that I asked myself, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because if you look at news, the social media, they all talk about six pack in 6 weeks, or millionaire overnight. I mean, that's the one that we see in the media. However, these books, there's a common theme that I was seeing in these books, that small actions repeated over a long time will give you significant results. So that was a big mindset shift for me, and I'm glad you like those books and we're on the same page. So so just want to circle back. So you said in 2014 is when you started like reading extensively nonfiction. So how old were you then?
I would have been 24, I guess.
Oh, okay, all right. So that
Yeah.
was or like 9 years or 10, almost like a decade ago. So you started
Yeah.
your reading journey, and then I saw your Instagram post, and then I really want to ask this question. So the Instagram post that you said was you read 1,290 books in 10 years. So I thought it was a typo, but and later on I did the math. So that's like 120 books per year. So
Mm.
that's more than 2 books per week. How on earth can you do that? I
Yeah.
really want to know. I really want to know what's your
Well,
reading process.
well, it's funny. So, I mean, a lot of it had to do with having all this time on my hands and working that job that allowed me all of this downtime to focus on reading. So, like, I don't try and fit reading in to the rest of my life. I've made it a priority. And I fit the rest of my life around my reading and around my fitness and around the things that are important to me, right? So I schedule that first, and then I schedule everything else around it. And that's really been key to me. And you're right. I mean, the math is, because I'll get, a few comments on posts like that, and like, oh, there's no way, there's no way you could do that. But really, I mean, you have, a job where you have, 8-10 hours of downtime a night, and I was working this job 4, 5, 6 nights a week, sometimes 7, and so like that's a tremendous. Like, I'm surprised that I didn't read. Like, if I was really going flat out, I could have read way more. So it's really, I mean, the time, it's exactly like Naval said, like you said, I mean, the ability, the opportunity is there. It's the will to do so that's scarce. It's all of these distractions and, lesser priorities, like everything that's distracting you from your main goal is by definition a lesser goal. And my goal now is to read 10,000 books, which again is it's an arbitrary number. Like, it doesn't
Yep.
mean anything. There's no prize or anything to read 10,000 books, but it's motivating. I enjoy going after goals, right? And that's a priority. And a priority is not keeping up on news that I don't care about, that's going to be irrelevant next week. It's
True.
all my focus is reading.
Yeah, I like the way you said about priority. That's a change in mindset as well, because I used to
Mm,
say I don't have time, but it's just that everybody has the same 24 hours a day, right? Like the
yeah.
richest man in the world versus the poorest man in the world, both, that's the greatest equalizer, like 24 hours in a day, and
Mm,
that's so important to understand. So I actually changed my language. I stopped using the word or the sentence "I don't have time," and
mm,
replacing that with it's not my priority. So
yeah.
when that mindset shift happens, right? uh you just change, because let's say if I don't have time to exercise, right? If you replace that with exercise is not my priority, it's a different language, because exercise is almost everybody's priority. They want to be healthy, but it's just that
Mm,
they're using the lack of ability to exercise with like time, like saying that's an excuse, right? So I stopped using that sentence, and then and then replace that with "that's not my priority," and then that completely changed the way I behaved. So that it's good that you had mentioned. So
mm.
I'm glad we're on the
Well,
same page.
how you speak to yourself is so important. I mean, that goes back to
Yep.
Maxwell Maltz. Like, every single person. I mean, like there's like somebody is always listening to what you're saying, even if it's just you. Like, you're always hearing what you're saying, and
Yep.
like, if you make a promise to yourself and then you don't follow through, then you pay attention to that. You've broken a promise to yourself, and that's very damaging to your self-esteem, your self-image, right? And as they say, I mean, you don't make time for fitness, you got to make time for illness, right? I mean, that's just how it
Yes,
is.
yes,
And
yes,
one
yes,
of the
yes,
I was just thinking about this the other day. I mean, ignorance costs a lot more, time and frustration than reading,
yep,
so.
yep. True, true. Yeah, there is some. I think we can talk for hours about reading all these. So excited.
Yeah.
So
Oh yeah.
yeah, I want to know. I really want to dig into your reading process, because you said,
Sure.
so do you read multiple books at the same time? What's your note taking process? Because after
Hmm.
reading so many books, it's very hard for me, at least. Like, now I have developed systems over time, but initially, right? I mean, after I read a book, and then 1 month later, I would forget most of the stuff that's in the book. This is when I first
Sure.
started my reading journey. So what's your reading process? Like, how do you retain what you read? Do you read multiple books at the same time? Can you walk me through that?
Sure, of course. And yet, note taking is a massive part of my process, and I've got notes for every single book. Those 1,300 books, and that's not to say that I never forget anything. I absolutely do. It's an unreasonable expectation that you're going to remember every single thing, and I wouldn't put like I don't want anyone to put pressure on themselves to like you're naturally going to forget things. There are things you can do, however, that make that make it significantly more likely that you will remember. And taking notes and reviewing those notes is massive. And there's a concept or a practice called spaced repetition, which is exactly what it sounds like. You basically you review your notes the day after you read, and then the next day, and then say 3 days after, and then again a week after, and then again a month after, and like that's what I'll do as well, because there's a this is hard to sort of visualize, but there's a forgetting curve where you forget a lot of what you read at a certain point in time after you've read it, but then when you revisit that material, it sort of halts the forgetting curve, and then you stop that process of forgetting, and then you sort of retain it in long-term memory. And another thing that helps tremendously is teaching it to someone else. And that's one of the another benefit of what I do, just recommending books and talking about books, writing about books, is I get to revisit this material, and in the process of sharing it and teaching it to other people as well. So as they say, when you teach something, you get to learn it twice, and I find that to
Yes,
be
yes.
absolutely true. So for anyone who's listening and wants to remember more of what they read, talk about what you're listening or about what you're learning, and with other people, and share your knowledge. And in that process, you will solidify your own understanding, your own memory, and you'll remember a lot more. And then returning to your notes, that's a big one. There's a practice called um, let's see, it's forced recall is what it's called. And again, it's sort of self-explanatory, but you don't look at your notes. Basically, you try to recall as much from memory as you possibly can without looking at your notes, and it's sort of it's more effortful in the mind. And when learning is more effortful, you're more likely to remember. So there's it's funny. So the best way to kind of to talk about it is that when you read your notes, it's the brain kind of thinks that it's learning or remembering, but really it's just recognizing. So it seems familiar, so you think that you've learned it, but it's not really learning. So what forced recall does is forces you to put in more work to recall that information, and the very act of effortful learning is what's going to help solidify it in memory. So spaced repetition and forced recall, taking notes, sharing it with others, and that right there is going to give you a lot of the benefit of learning and remembering. And again, things like getting enough sleep. I mean, so many people are just chronically sleep deprived, as I'm sure you are as a new father.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
as much as you can, as much as people can, because sleep is when memories are consolidated, and you solidify your learning in sleep. So it's super important to the learning process. So things like that. You asked me if I read multiple books at the same time. Yes, I do, but not. I try to read fewer books at the same time than I have been. I have a bad habit of starting more books before I finish them, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that. So what I'll try to do, and I'm not doing like I'm like do as I say, not as I do. on this. But what I try to do is have 2 physical books and 2 ebooks and 1 audiobook at the same time. And so 5 books at the same time, I think that's, you can handle that as a reader. And there's usually I'm reading 1 or 2 fiction books, but not more than that, and mostly nonfiction. So that's kind of what I'll do. And some people, I mean, you might think that it's difficult to switch around those subjects, but when you think about when you were in school, you didn't study one thing for
Yes.
months and then move on to something else. You had math class in the morning and then English in the afternoon and then something else later on. So
That's true.
you can switch between these things. Like you're not gonna mess yourself up. But yeah. Yeah, a few books at the same time, but not too many. I don't. I'm trying to finish a few of the books that I have on the go now, so I can get back down to 5 and then sort of keep it there. But it's tough if you like to read because you're interested in everything. You just want to move on to the next thing. So
Yeah, I mean, actually, I was in the mindset that for me especially, I think it's almost a similar story for everybody because when I first started reading, I thought if I picked a book, I thought I should read it from cover to cover because that's how we were born and we were told like when we were in school like we were not allowed to quit a book, right? When we were told, hey, you got to start from the beginning and then finish until the end. That's how reading was. And then I actually honestly during my reading journey, there was one point where I was stuck on a single book for a couple months. It's a book called *Sapiens*. So *Sapiens* is
oh yeah,
it's a dense book. I mean, it's a great read though, but it's a dense book. For me, the initial part of reading journey, like I believe 5 years ago, I felt I should read that book, but I didn't have since it was so complex. I didn't have that what I would say like the eagerness to learn more about that book. So I didn't start a different book because I was in the mindset that okay, if I start some book, I need to finish it. So I stayed on that book for almost a couple of months. And then I heard Naval Ravikant on Joe Rogan podcast. So when he talked about he reads almost like 50 books in his Kindle, he has it open and depending on his mood, like, he would
yeah,
like read philosophy or he would read like self-help or business book. That a podcast actually changed the way I read books because he said, start more books, quit more books, but reread the best books. I still remember that in my mind. So for me, like, if I don't like a book, there are so many good books out there. It's not worth spending. But again, I don't quit too early is because I know even you talk about this in your videos, which I want you to explain about the 10% rule. So can you talk about the 10% rule as to when people can actually quit books and then start the next ones? Can you talk more about it?
sure. Yeah, well, I think you're absolutely right on with that, and I don't think that anyone should feel pressure to finish a book that they're not enjoying or that's not serving them. And it's funny. I'm reading *Sapiens* right now, and it's one of those books that I have to finish and then move on to something else.
Eh,
It's the exact same thing with me. It's dense and it's really good, but I don't want to rush through it. But I'm not. It's funny. I'm not always in the mood to read it. Right? Like sometimes you just want to read something else,
yeah,
and like that's exactly kind of how I felt with like some great works like *Paradise Lost* and *Faust*. And like books like that, they're heavier and more difficult, right? So, and I don't always, sometimes you just want to read a simple novel or something or a
yeah, yeah.
lighter nonfiction book. You're not always in the mood for great literature or
Mhm.
deep science, right? That's absolutely a great idea to sort of move around. And yeah, the 10% rule. So basically the idea is that you get 10% in a book before you decide to finish it or not, or basically, or give yourself enough of a chance to really sort of allow it to hook you before you decide to stop or keep going. And obviously, it's not hard or fast. And one of the great things about reading is that there are no rules. Like there's no test that you have to go
Yeah.
through. Like as an adult, like no one's testing you on these books, right? And so you can skip around chapters. Like if like I would there's things that I would recommend not skipping, like the introduction to the book. Some people don't read the introduction to books, and that baffles me. But at the
Yeah.
same time, if there's a chapter that you're just not that you just do not care, skip it. Like if it's not relevant to you, don't feel that you have to read it. And so that's definitely something that I'd recommend. And you can, I don't know, you can read whatever you want whenever you want. Like there are no
True,
rules.
true. There's no rules.
And the only, I mean, like the only thing that sort of determines whether you're I don't know, quote successful or not is if you get what you want out of life. And if you like, there's no prize for finishing this book. If you don't finish this book, but you get everything that you wanted out of life, and like that's a victory. You don't. It's again. I mean, I keep track of everything as I've said, but at the end of the day, it's just a vanity metric. It doesn't mean anything. Like there's no, the person who's read 700 books is less smart than the person who's read 900. That's not a thing. So I wouldn't feel any pressure, and I mean that can stop you from reading more books if you view it as some sort of a big chore, like some heavy intellectual responsibility that it's daunting, right? When reading shouldn't be daunting. It should be something that you look forward to. Like I mean, my routine in the morning, I make a coffee and I sit down to read for several hours, like first thing, and it's just something that I get up and look forward to. It's that first coffee or that first 3 coffees and an afternoon or morning of reading. So
True. I mean, I look forward to my reading sessions as well because again, if there is this quote like if you don't enjoy reading, you haven't found the right book yet. So it's
exactly. Yeah.
yeah. So it's just that there's always like almost every book reader that I speak to, there's always one book that transforms their mindset, and they're hooked into the reading. But if you haven't found the right book, just please for the listeners, just keep reading. You will find the right book, and then nobody can stop you there. So I know we just brushed over that 10% rule, but so from what I understand, so 10% rule is, let's say if a book is 200 pages, so if you read, you have to give it at least like 20 pages to decide if it's worth your time before actually quitting too early, because author has spent so much time into that book, and he's condensing his life's experience into that book. So give it some time. I mean, if you really don't like after 10 pages, or like 10% rule, which is 20 pages, just move on to the next book. So I want to come back to your note taking process. I want to zoom in a little bit because it's for selfish reasons. I want to improve as well because
Sure.
I have a note taking process, but it really depends. If I find a book to be very useful, I'll take some actions, and I'll record some Google Doc, and also track it in a spreadsheet. I don't do that for every book, but if I find a book that's very useful, then I would do that. So so what's your note taking process? So do you have a pen and paper, or do you like type it into a Google Doc, or what does it look like?
Sure. So it's funny. The first thing that I'll say here is something that I think I learned this from Tim Ferriss, where he said that the slightly imperfect system that you actually use is going to be way better than the absolutely perfect system that you never use, right? So like the absolute perfect note taking system, if you don't use it, it's not a good note taking system, right? So yeah, exactly. So you have to just like make sure that you actually use it. And so I've simplified mine as much as possible. Like mine is dead simple. I use Google Docs. Now you can take physical notes, and actually there's something to that where the mental connection between your hand and your brain, like there's a like an actual like neurological connection, and you remember more of what you read when you sort of establish that connection by taking handwritten notes that you don't actually get with digital notes. And so I know that, but I don't do it because I know that I'm not going to take handwritten notes. And my thinking is that, like if you move, somewhere else, or like there's a fire or a flood or something like that. And even, I mean, again, this is a personal choice, but like if you write notes in your book, or in the back of your book, and then you lend that book to someone or you lose it, then your notes are lost forever, and you have all these books everywhere that you don't know where they are. So like that for me is just chaos. So like that's not what I do. So I keep everything in Google Docs, and so again it's super simple. So I have a list of finished books, and that's separated by book and by year. So before 2014, and then 2014 all the way down to today. That document is 30 pages long, which is pretty crazy. Just the list of books. So I have that I can return to, and that's excellent because like everything that everything in Google Docs is searchable, right? So you if you're looking for a particular book, you just type in the name of that book, and then you go directly there. Or even if you remember a fragment of a quote that you're looking for or that you want to find, but you don't remember the whole quote or which book it's in, but you remember like a couple of words. Type in those couple of words, and every document that those words appear in will come up, and you'll be able to find it like instantly, right? And so I find it useful for things like that. And then it's backed up as well, so you don't lose them, or like you have several copies. Like it's a lot better. So I like that. Now my notes for the particular books, they're separated by year. Of course, I've got folders. So every book that I've read in 2015, I read that was a good reading year. I read 170 books in 2015, and every single book, my notes from all those books are in that one folder. So if there's a book that I read in 2015, like the Better Angels of Our Nature by Steven Pinker, which is a fantastic book. I read that in 2015, so I'd go to that folder, I'd look for that book, and I'd have all my notes from there. So that's almost literally it. I keep a list of favorite books and favorite notes from those books, like favorite quotes and ideas and things like that. But that's really all that I do. And the books themselves, it's really not much. It depends on the book for sure, but I'll write a brief summary, usually not more than a page, at the top, and just the key ideas, or like what I want to remember. And then basically every single note that I take from that book is in the rest of the document. So those are quotes, big ideas, ideas to implement in my life. Just things that every time I encounter something in a book that I never ever want to forget, it goes into my notes, and then they're in there forever. So that's basically what I do. And then a lot of times, so there's several books that I may not take a lot of notes from them, but I will apply them immediately. So recently, I just finished Day Trading Attention by Gary Vaynerchuk, and it's about social media and succeeding online, building your personal brand. And a lot of it, I didn't take many notes from that, but I implemented a lot. So I would I would hear something that he would say to do, and it wouldn't be worth it to make a note of it, but I would immediately implement it in my process. And things like that. So there are plenty of books where I may not have a lot of notes, but I will use a tremendous amount. And ideally, you want to apply it as fast as possible. So there's as close a period or as short a period as possible between reading and implementation, and that's really going to be key. But that's really it. And then the only other thing I'll say about note taking. As I'm reading, I try not to interrupt the flow of reading as much as possible. So I will have say I'm reading a physical book, or it doesn't even matter, ebook or whatever. I'll have my phone with me, and I'll just use my notes app on my iPhone. And so whenever I come across something that I want to enter into my notes, I'll make a note of what page it's on, and if it's a physical book, I'll note where on the page it is so I can find it later. And so, say on page 214 at the bottom, there's a sentence that starts like this. So in my notes, I'll write, 214 bottom, and then the first couple of words. And then later I'll go back and I'll do my notes, and then I'll see, okay, so then I'll go back to page 214, and I'll go to the bottom of the page and look for the sentence that starts that way. And I'll just type that into Google Docs, and that's in my notes. So, and like, that's really it. Like, I don't have some super complicated system, and like that works. And I think if it was more complicated than that, I wouldn't use it. So
True. I mean, I like the system that you developed. I think it's an evolution, right? Nobody starts their first book and then has this complicated note-taking process, but it just every reader has their own unique note-taking approach. I think Tim Ferriss also influenced my note-taking process as well. So initially, I used to read a lot of physical books, but later on, I watched Ali Abdaal's video. Like I consume a lot of his content, and then he said when he started using Kindle, it changed the way it changed the friction towards reading, because you have, like, it's more accessible, right? You can have it on your phone, you can like take it anywhere. Multiple books, it's almost like maybe hundreds of books in just a single like Kindle that you can carry wherever you want. So I started reading Kindle, and Tim Ferriss said his note-taking process is at least like once he highlights in Kindle and then he exports it to Evernote, and then he has that system there. Like it's searchable, right? If you really want to find a quote from any book that you've read, it's in one single click you can find what quote and from what book. So that I understood the power of it, but the major challenge that I faced was when I sit down to read, and then if I have a phone right next to me or my laptop or Google Doc that's open, I usually get distracted. But I believe your tip on just writing the page number and just going back to what you're reading so that you don't interrupt your flow. I think that's something I want to implement, because for now, for me, I usually write. I have a notebook where I document my notes, and then later on, if I find that book really helpful, that's when I transfer it to Google Docs and Google Sheets, and then I have a system for that. But I think you tell your tip on just noting down, I think that's powerful. I think I'll start using that from now. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the reading habit itself. So let's say if somebody wants to read more books, but the major challenge that or let- I get DMs on my Instagram page asking, hey, how do you read so many books? How do you find time? So what would you recommend? How can people make reading a habit that they can do every day?
Mm. Well, you want to associate reading with positive feelings, right? And I mean that comes with there's I think this is another Naval quote if I'm not mistaken, but he says, "Read what you love until you love
Yes,
to
that's
read."
it. That's it.
And I found just that's amazing advice. And
Yes.
instead of burdening yourself with these sort of dense books that you don't care about, like that's gonna like then like when you're making that association in your mind between reading and something like a chore that's like dreadfully
Yep.
boring and awful that you don't want to do, and obviously that's going to be a very difficult habit to instill if you think about reading that way, right? So I mean, as much as possible, just associate positive feelings with reading, and that comes with not being pressured to read the kind of books that everybody is reading or that you have to read. There are all these lists of like 100 books you must read to be considered well
Yep.
read. Like
Yep.
it's
Mhm.
garbage. Like it doesn't matter, right? So read what you love
True.
until you love to read. And another thing I would definitely recommend just bringing a book with you wherever you go. Like we already touched upon. So I mean, I have 5 different book apps on my phone, and maybe that's excessive, but basically there's never a time as long as I have my phone with me or a physical book that I can't read. If I'm buying groceries, or whatever, like literally whatever, any lineup that I find myself in, I'll just pull my phone out and I've got 1,000 books in my pocket. Like the old Apple slogan, 1,000 songs in your pocket. I've got 1,000
Yep.
books in my pocket.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just make it as as accessible as possible and as easy as possible. And like that comes with just having books around you and easy access to them. And I mean even like another habit of working out and being healthy and fit. You want to remove the friction and like
Yep.
remove as many steps as possible between where you are and being at the gym, right? So the same kind of idea. You put your gym clothes out the night before, you put them next to the door, and you sort of you make it easier on yourself to do. And if it's easy to do, and you reinforce that positive association that reading is fun and it's helping, and like I'm learning all of this fantastic stuff, and it's making my life better, then you're naturally just gonna want to do it. And then you'll get to a point, I mean, maybe, I mean, that most people do, that I certainly have, where it's like a tipping point that it's like there's no going back. Like
Yep.
there are just so many books that are just amazing, and I want to read them all right now. And I don't want to do anything else. Like I just want all of that information. I want to hear, and
Yep.
it's
Yep.
incredibly exciting. And once you sort of get that sort of that internal excitement going, and you ramp that up, you're going to be a very tough reader to stop. And that's my advice there.
That's a great advice. I mean, I can totally relate, because I believe it's James Clear who wrote in this book, Atomic Habits. Our environment has got so much impact on
Mm.
how we behave and what decisions we make. Because for me, I used to rely too much on my willpower, because let's say when I have some junk food in the house, right? I mean, in the morning I would decide, hey, I want to be healthy. I'm not gonna eat them. So they're right in front of me, but I'm relying too much on my willpower. I'm not gonna eat them, and then towards the end of the day, my willpower is gone, and then I would end up eating the junk food, because it's just that throughout the day they're
Mhm.
right in front of you, and then you make so many decisions, but towards the end of the day, you'll give up, right? So we totally underestimate the power of environment, and we overestimate our willpower. So just like what I did was, after reading Atomic Habits, I tried to tweak my environment, where I remove all the junk food, and then replace it with healthy foods. And similarly, I did that with my reading habit as well. I spread books. I mean, I live in a three-bedroom apartment. Spread books across my apartment. In every bedroom, there are books, So there, and my remote, I want to watch less TV, so my remote usually is not very accessible. So if I really want to watch TV, it's right behind the TV. I have to get up and then grab the remote. Versus, there's a book right in front of me on the coffee table. So I would rather, like, I'm so lazy, so I'll just pick that book up and then start reading. So I'm just
Yeah.
tweaking my environment, so that I'm priming my environment so that I'll read more books. And I love your advice on having Kindle app, or like having access to books on your phone, because I mean, we all have time. I think there's a stat where average American spends 4 to 5 hours on TV and social media. So we all have time. I mean, you just replace that time, like even with 15 minutes of reading, that can like totally change the way you read. So that's a great advice right there. So I wanna even switch gears a little bit and talk about the content creation journey. So you said in 2014 is when you started reading all non-fiction books. But so what was the motivation behind starting Instagram page? I know you have like more than 100,000 followers. That's not an easy feat. So what was the motivation behind starting that page?
Yeah, well, from the very beginning, the motivation was to create a business out of it. One of the best business books that I recommend all the time is it's called The Millionaire Fast Lane by M.J. DeMarco,
Yep,
and
yep,
I've read
yep.
every single book that he's written. And there's a follow up book called Unscripted, and then another one after that called The Great Rat Race Escape, and those
Yes,
are all
yes,
excellent.
yep.
And
Mhm.
just the way, I mean, like there was no future in what I was doing. Like like I could, yeah, I mean, I could even go back to school, or I could get, some job. I could, work my way up some company for, 40 years and retire. That life was death to me. I couldn't do it. And so, there was no future that I could envision where I didn't succeed. Like there was no possible future that I even saw in my mind that I wasn't massively successful. And I know that, like you have to sort of, like, you can't just wait for it to happen. You can't just want it to happen. You have to make it happen. You have to will it to happen. You have to give everything that you have, for this life that you want. And so that was the motivation. And like I wasn't starting my Instagram page or YouTube channel with the mindset that maybe this works out, or I hope this works out. And like from the very beginning, I was in it for a very long time, and it's I was willing to play the long game. Like I knew, yes, people blow up on Instagram relatively fast. You can there have been days where I've gained thousands of followers in a day. But then there are times when I'd lose maybe 25 followers, or like for 10 days in a row or something like that. It's ebbs and flows, but if you stick with it long enough, like it's very difficult to stop someone who just keeps showing up. And that's what I did for the last 2+ years. I just kept showing up. And I mean, if you look at my Instagram, I think there's 1,600 posts or something like that. And maybe the first 100 it was more like a personal Instagram, but after that, it was with the intention of building an audience. So that's like, I mean, that's 1,500 posts over several years, and like that's all with the intention of growing this thing. And it's just it's reps. It's taking shot after shot, and just not giving up. And the same thing with YouTube. I'm really YouTube's one of those platforms that I think every creator, at least every educational creator, should go all in on. It's one of the easiest, not easiest, but most profitable platforms. Like easiest to make a full time living. Like it's very like one thing I'll say, like having like having 100,000 TikTok followers is a lot less useful than having 100,000 Instagram followers, right? And having 100,000 YouTube subscribers is even better than having 100,000 on Instagram. Those different platforms are better for building a business and building a sustainable business that's going to allow you to do this full time, or to go full time as a creator. So YouTube is big, but again, it's one of those things where your first 100 videos are going to be terrible. No one's going to watch them. And, it's difficult. It takes hours and hours. You have to put effort into it. You have to script and record. Some people have a fear of getting on camera and speaking to people, and they're afraid of negative comments or hateful judgments or what have you. So there's that element of it that you have to get over, and like all of these hurdles, right? And it stops a lot of people. But if you just keep going, and if you just keep showing up and you keep hammering away at it, and if you want it as bad as you say that you want it, then things can happen and things start compounding, and then just opportunities just come to you. And that's the way it's worked for me. And you look at the growth of not just my channel or page, or like a lot of people, right? Like it's like nothing for a long time, like nothing happens and then everything happens. And it's just that's the way it works. You have to sort of get past that initial period where it's hard. Nobody's paying attention to you. Nobody's watching your videos. You might get a comment or a like. You're doing it without any sort of external rewards. You're not making any money from it, but you have to get past that. And then once you do, things will happen and things will start moving. And that's what stops a lot of people. But if it doesn't stop you, then the opportunities are massive. And you can make a full-time living and make a career, make a life out of what you love. And that's what I've done. Like that's what you do. Like that's it's possible. You can't give up. And like that's just the way it is.
True. Actually, that's also something that I learned from Naval's book, Almanac of Naval Ravikant as well. He said the latest trend is towards like code and media. Like if you know how to code,
Yeah.
and if you know how to sell on a media, then nobody's going to stop you. And if you enjoy that process, because nobody can be you, right? You can only be yourself. And then if you he calls it like leverage. When the internet is the biggest leverage ever, because I mean I experienced this myself. I've started podcasting recently, and then if I just post like one video, and then it's somebody's gonna watch somewhere in the world, right? Even if you sleep, like somebody's gonna watch your stuff. So the internet is so powerful that I totally underestimated it. But I had like challenges myself as well. Like it took me actually 3 years since I started my reading journey to start my Instagram page. But it's real, because the challenge is real, because the first step is always hard. And then how was it like? Did you in terms of like your journey? How was it for you for taking the first step? How difficult was it for you to take that first step of showcasing yourself to the world? How difficult was it?
It wasn't very difficult for me, actually, but I think a lot of it had to do with my experience working at that bar, and like at these other jobs, right, where I would speak to people all day or all night, basically, right? I'd meet thousands of people, and I would learn how to speak to people, how to listen, and just make my opinions heard, make myself heard, and that transfers over as well. And a lot of it was, just practice in the beginning as well. So the videos that nobody ever saw, I've deleted a bunch of videos from my YouTube that were from years ago that are just terrible. Like nobody wants to watch those. Like they're just awful, right? Like they will never be seen again by anybody. But I had to do that in order to get to the ones that I'm recording now. And even these ones, like, a year from now, 2 years from now, these ones that I'm recording now, like they're going to be awful. And actually, I came out with this online course a few months ago, and I took it down. And like maybe 6 months ago, I recorded this thing, and it's not available because it's just too bad. Like I have to I'm re-recording the whole thing because 6 months ago I've just gotten dramatically better. and like I couldn't even watch my old videos, right? But I think that's good. Like if you can't watch the videos from months ago, then you're doing something right. You're improving at a rapid rate,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I think that's a fantastic thing. And Naval's right. I mean, once like you learn to build and learn to sell, and then you can basically just do anything. And leverage, like you said, is just so crucial. And like different kinds of leverage. There's labor leverage and capital leverage,
yep,
and what else? Code and media, right?
yep,
And and like code meaning like like courses or like YouTube and things like that. Media leverage, your social media,
yep,
those two things. Financial leverage as well. And people labor leverage, like video editors or like your team members that help you. Like those four types of leverage can just catapult you. And it's something that not everybody starts with. Maybe you have more of the other, or more of one or the other, but you start somewhere, and you have to keep going. Actually, the author of that was on my podcast a little while ago, Eric Jorgensen, and he's got another book out. It's called The Anthology of Biology, which is phenomenal. And so
yep.
Balaji is this tech genius, the futurist, and the book is about finding truth and building the future. And it's incredibly exciting, and I loved it. And he's got another one that he's working on about Elon Musk. So he's got those three books that he's basically diving into the life work ideas of those three people, and he'll have those three books. And I recommend definitely the first two that are out right now, and his book on Elon is going to be really good too. So
Wow, I mean, I like his book, of course, Almanac of Navalavika, and I've
mm,
heard about the Balaji book. I didn't get a chance to read that yet, but I'm sure I'll be
it's
reading it
good.
soon. Yeah, oh, yeah, I'm gonna add it to my reading list now. So, I want people to understand the importance of code in media, which is brushed over it. But the
Mm,
biggest advantage about code in media is it's permissionless, right? I mean, for
yeah.
capital, you need somebody else's capital to start your own business, and then for labor you need somebody else to say yes to work
Yeah.
for you, right? But
Yeah.
when it comes to like code and media, you can just, if you really have that passion, you can just open an Instagram page within minutes, and then you can start your own YouTube channel within a minute. So there is no gatekeeper right there. So if somebody really wants to start their social media journey, there is nobody stopping you. It's only just you or your own limiting belief. So I actually want to dig deeper on your online business, but I mean, I know we don't have too much time, so I would love to have you a second time on this podcast, just talking about online business, how people can
Sure.
start their online business, and also improving their social media presence. So we're getting towards the end of the podcast, and there are a few questions that I ask all my guests. So I call them hot seat questions. The first question is: so we have discussed a lot of stuff today. There are so many actions, but compounding project is all about taking action, because for the compounding to start its effect, you have to take that first step. So what is that one small action that you would recommend people take after listening to this episode? One small action.
That's going to depend a lot on what they want to do with their life. But I would, like it's not what I would say immediately is that it's not immediately apparent what you should do with your life. I think a lot of people don't try enough things, and that's one of. I mean, I don't regret going to university at all. It was like some of the best years of my life. I loved my time there, but I think it's unrealistic to expect that someone who's 18, 19 years old, even younger than that, is going to decide at that age what they want to do for
Yeah,
the rest of their life, and then
yeah,
commit
yeah,
tens of thousands of dollars to pursue this line of study, and then just saddle themselves with all this student debt. Like that's not a good system. Where like I think they just you need to try more things, and you won't know what you're really good at or what you actually enjoy unless you actually try it. So I would, the very first thing, if there's someone who's listening that doesn't know what they want to do, I would make a list of potential experiments that you could run, that things that you could try, that things that you maybe that look interesting, that you're not quite sure about, that you maybe like you could possibly see a future in, but you don't have enough information. So try it. Like say you want to like start a YouTube channel, like use that as an experiment. If there's a particular sport that you've always wanted to try out, like try it. and like try it now, because you're not going to have time later. You're going to have responsibilities, and things just come up, and just things demands on your time. Like now, like as soon as possible, like when you have the time is when you should really experiment. And then like once you get feedback, once you gather data from those experiments, then you can sort of go further in. Then it gets a lot easier to sort of give advice on what they should do next, because then you sort of have an idea. So I would just try a bunch of things, and then follow your curiosity, and then just sort of just keep going, because all of the rewards are later on. They're further down the path, right? So.
Yeah, I think there's a book called Range by Dave Epstein, I believe, or
Yep.
Range. So it
Yeah,
talks
it's
about
really good.
it talks about the same concept that you had mentioned, that try multiple things, and then you will figure out what you're passionate about. Because for me, I mean, reading is my passion, and I was never a reader growing up, so I discovered reading after I started my reading journey, and then I developed passion towards it. So just try a few things. I like that advice. There's a great advice. So my second question is, so reading is an integral part of my compounding journey, because it started the compounding project. So what are the three books that you would recommend in three areas of life? So one book on health, one book on wealth, and one book on wisdom or self-help.
Sure. I could give like 10 for each,
Yeah, I
for
know,
each,
I know.
or
It's true.
100 for each. Let's see. Again, I'll go health first, even though that's the one that I would have the most trouble recommending. I would say Life Force by Tony Robbins. I think that's one of the better ones. Because that's, I don't know. Okay, so it's somewhat practical. If I can cheat a little bit and say to Life Force, Tony Robbins, because that's a lot about some of the just the crazy advancements in medical science that are either here now or they're coming very soon. Like you can edit people's genes with CRISPR, and grow new organs, and like just eliminate cancer with this non-invasive. It's crazy, just the things that already exist or will exist in the next couple of years. So that's one of like the books that's super motivating as well. Like if you think about like the things that are possible now, like I'm 34. Like when I'm 84, like 50 years from now, like that's assuming technology doesn't slow down, and it's only getting faster. Like 50 years from now, what's possible in terms of science? Like like there's this guy Brian Johnson. He's like live as long as possible so you can live forever. So Life Force, really good. But also Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. Sleep is just like one of the most important things that you could do, and like so many people are just chronically deprived of it. And Why We Sleep is like, he's one of the world's most renowned sleep experts, and he just makes a very convincing case why you do not want to skip out on sleep. So those two. And sorry, okay, there are two other categories. Wealth. For starting a business, definitely Millionaire Fastlane. I think that's like 100% what people should read. But in terms of like maybe like personal wealth, there's another a very accessible book, and it's called The Simple Path to Wealth by J.L. Collins. And it's really easy to read and fun to read, and it's all about the stock market and investing and things like that. And what's interesting about the mix of those two books, so Millionaire Fastlane is more like fast lane, of course, but even like it's not like a get rich next week book. Like Fastlane for MJ DeMarco is like 3, 5, 10 years, whereas the Slow Lane, which is J.L. Collins' book, is like 40, 50 years, like patiently investing in the stock market and then sort of slowly accumulating wealth over time, compounding, right? So both of those views have merit, and I think you want to do both. Like MJ DeMarco, he invests in the stock market too, but he also he doesn't see the point of sacrificing your quality of life when you're young and healthy and most fully alive for some distant point in the future when you're like 70 and you have more money, right? One of the things he says is that Lamborghinis don't, or wheelchairs don't fit in the trunks of Lamborghinis, right? So it's like you're gonna have money when you're older, but you're also gonna have medical bills and things like that, right? So those two books, and then wisdom. There's tons. One that sticks out, and I recommend this book all the time, and I love the opportunity to recommend it to more people. Like I'll just keep pushing this book. It's called The Revolution from Within by this guy named Jiddu Krishnamurti, and he was one of my absolute favorite people. And this book, I have pages and pages and pages of notes, and I remember exactly where I was when I first read it.
I mean, that's so interesting. I've heard about that book, but I've never got a chance to read that book yet. But I've got a ton
Oh
of
yeah.
recommendations from this podcast. Circle back to what you said about health, because you mentioned life force and why we sleep,
Mm,
and it's such a coincidence that Nick from Book Thinkers,
mm,
he recommended those two books for health as well.
nice.
Yeah. So he said he wanted to recommend Why We Sleep, but we talked about that book in that podcast. So he recommended Life Force by Tony Robbins, which I haven't read, but I'm gonna read. But I read Millionaire Fast Lane and Simple Path to Wealth. Like both are great. I mean, I
Mm,
love the concept of financial independence from this book, Simple Path to Wealth, and I would highly recommend people read that if they think about the freedom, like the financial freedom or the financial independence
mhm.
movement that's going on.
I recommend Nick's book as well, Rise of the Reader. I read that
Yes.
earlier this year, and no,
Yep.
sorry, last year I think, and it's really good too. So if anyone hasn't read that, The Rise of the Reader by Nick Hutchison.
Yep, yeah, that's a good one too. I read that book. I mean,
Mm,
I like the way he structured that book into like health, wealth, and happiness. So I love
yeah,
the habits towards the end of the book. So that's such a good one. So the third question is actually a rapid fire where I ask five fast questions, and then I'll give you two options. So they're all about books. So
okay.
yeah. So the first question. So I'll give you two options. So please pick one that comes to your mind like right away. The first. So are you ready?
As ready as I'll ever be.
Yes. Okay. So, paperback or Kindle?
Paperback. You have to. Yes,
Eh,
there's something about holding a physical book. It's just there's nothing like it.
Yes, I agree. Fiction or non-fiction?
It's just, yeah. I don't know. Both
Both. Okay. All right. Audiobooks or podcasts?
audiobooks.
All right. Self-help or biographies?
Self help.
Okay. All right. Last one. Time or money?
Time. Yeah,
All right. All right.
yeah. No
Uh,
question there.
that's good. With that, yeah, Matt. Yeah, that's thanks for your time. It's been a pleasure. I totally enjoyed this podcast. So, how can people find more about you? What are your Instagram handles?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm everywhere basically. Instagram's pretty easy to find. I'm at the Matt Karamazov. There on Instagram. YouTube is just Matt Karamazov. And then I've got my newsletter. It's called The Reading Life, and it goes out 3 times a week. The best of what I'm reading and what I have read. So I share my notes from some of my top selections, my top book recommendations, and about 4,300 people get that newsletter now, which is pretty cool. And so those are the main three. And I have a private mastermind group for business owners and specifically online business owners. And so I help them grow their online presence and build up their business basically. And that's called the Competitive Advantage. So I've got that, and then other platforms as well. But those are the main ones, and I'm easy to find wherever. So Matt Karamazov books, you'll find me.
Yeah, please do follow his check his page, and he has amazing content. I would love to have you second time on the podcast just to talk about online social media, and then also about your fitness habits, because
Sure.
I look at your Instagram page and you hold like 10 books. You're like super jacked, and then I really want to talk about your fitness habits as well. So I would love to have you second time on the podcast. With that, Matt, thanks for your time, and it's been a pleasure.
Thanks very much. And I feel it's the same way. Absolute pleasure. And thank you very much for having me on. I will definitely come back for another one. That would be fantastic.
Sure, thank you. Until next time, goodbye.